So let's summarise a little bit, and I'm going to do it in the following way. We now have an expression for planned aggregate expenditure, and we fully understand that that has both an exogenous and an endogenous component. We know that in general the economy's output, the economy's GDP, the economy's income, the economy's expenditure can be written as the expenditure of our four sectors: household consumption, firms. Now, in general, firms' expenditure can consist of either planned or unplanned investment, and we've had a good look at the circumstances where there will be some unplanned investment, government expenditure, and exports. I'd ask you to think back to our second lecture, where in the discussion of GDP, I also described for you how we can think of GDP in terms of aggregate income and how that aggregate income might be used. So this is not something we've talked about in the context of the Keynesian model, but I'm now going to bring that material in for a complete description of the economy's equilibrium and disequilibrium. Recall that aggregate income can be used for the purposes of consumption of domestic goods and services. It can also be used to purchase imports. It can also be used as saving, remembering that that saving is both saving by the private sector, that saving is private sector saving, so that's saving by households and business. And income can be used for taxation. What we have here is two different ways of representing the same thing, the economy's gross domestic product. So it must be the case if we subtract consumption from both of those expressions, that in general we have the following circumstance, where the economy's investment, both planned and unplanned, plus government expenditure, plus exports, must always be equal to the economy's imports, plus saving, plus taxation. Now let me work with that for a moment, and you'll see why this is important very shortly. I want to introduce first another piece of terminology for you. Imports, saving and taxation, when added together, are going to be known collectively as the economy's withdrawals. Withdrawals, you can think of this as the opposite of injections. Injections, remember, is where purchasing power is coming into the economy. Withdrawals, either through import, saving or taxation, think of that as a flow of purchasing power outside of the economy. What we've established is that at any point in time, the economy's withdrawals are going to have to correspond, simply through the logic of how we measure gross domestic product, to the economy's total investment plus government spending plus exports. Now, we're going to work on the assumption that withdrawals respond systematically to the economy's income. That the higher is the economy's income, the higher will be imports, the higher will be saving, and the higher will be taxation. If you think about it intuitively, that makes sense. The more income households have, for example, the more imports they're likely to purchase. The more income there is in the economy, the more saving is likely to be undertaken. And given the way we've written the tax system, you'll recall that taxes vary systematically with income as well. So withdrawals can be represented by a positively sloped line positively sloped because the higher is income, the higher will be withdrawals. Remember that at the same time, withdrawals must also correspond to the sum total of total investment, government spending and exports. Now you might be looking at that and being slightly puzzled, because didn't we say that planned investment, government spending and exports were exogenous and not related to income? Well, that's certainly true for those three components, but that's not true of unplanned investment, where unplanned investment can, through inventory changes, through unexpected inventory changes, vary according to production. If you're producing too much relative to planned aggregate expenditure, for example, then you're going to see unplanned inventories increase. So the withdrawal schedule, and it's probably easiest to think about it in terms of this right-hand side, the withdrawal schedule shows us a systematic relationship between imports, saving, taxation, collectively, and income. Now, why is that useful for us? It's useful for us if we go back and think carefully about the concept of equilibrium. Because equilibrium, at a very fundamental level, can be thought of as a situation where there are no surprises, where firms are not experiencing either an unexpected increase or an unexpected decrease in inventories. So that in equilibrium, I'll just write it like that, unplanned investment has to equal zero. There are no surprises, firms are not experiencing any unexpected changes to inventories. Which means in equilibrium, and only in equilibrium, it must be the case that planned investment plus government spending plus exports equals imports plus saving plus taxation, which are our withdrawals. This expression is true always, and that's just because of the way we have constructed our gross domestic product. This expression, however, is true only in equilibrium because it is only in equilibrium that there are no unplanned changes to investment. What I'm doing here is providing you with an alternate way of thinking about equilibrium. It was perfectly consistent with what we've been looking at previously. So if we take that diagram and add to it planned injections, then this point here is another way of representing the economy's equilibrium. It is only at that point do we have withdrawals equal to planned injections, and withdrawals can only equal planned injections if there are no unplanned changes to inventories. What you're looking at there is an alternate representation of the economy's equilibrium. So now we can use both ways of thinking about equilibrium and provide a complete characterisation of the economy's equilibrium. Note that although the withdrawals equaling planned injections is an alternate way of thinking about equilibrium, you're really conveying the same information. It's a situation corresponding to planned aggregate expenditure being equal to output. There are no unplanned changes to investment. There are no reasons why firms should vary their levels of production. So let's build up this complete picture of equilibrium. We have now our withdrawals schedule, which has a positive slope. because we think that savings, taxes and imports vary systematically with income. So there we have one way of representing the economy's equilibrium. That must, as a matter of logic, correspond to the more familiar way now of representing equilibrium, where planned aggregate expenditure cuts the 45-degree line. You're really looking at two different ways of saying the same thing.